The 1988 American Western action film Young Guns depicts the adventures of infamous Billy the Kid during the Lincoln County War, which took place in New Mexico in 1877-78. The movie has been described as the most historically accurate of all the Billy the Kid films as of June 1990. But how true to the real events is this much-loved movie? The movie opens in the 1870s Lincoln County, New Mexico, with the English cattleman John Turnstall hiring a wayward young gunman named Billy to join the Regulators, who live and work on his ranch. It is on the ranch that he meets Doc Scurlock, Josiah Chaz, Dick Brewer, Dirty Steve Stevens and Charlie Beaudry. The real Billy the Kid was born Henry McCarthy to parents of Irish Catholic ancestry, Catherine and Patrick McCarthy, in New York City. While his birth year has been confirmed as 1859, the exact date of his birth has been disputed as either the 17th of September or the 23rd of November of that year. Billy was orphaned at the age of 15. His first arrest was for stealing food at the age of 16 in 1875. 10 days later he robbed a Chinese laundry and was arrested again but escaped shortly afterwards. He fled from New Mexico Territory into neighbouring Arizona Territory, making himself both an outlaw and a federal fugitive. In 1877 he began to call himself William H. Bonney. In the movie, Tunstall tries to educate the men in his employ and tells Billy to read from a newspaper. Unexpectedly, Billy reads well. This is true that he could read, though he probably had little schooling. Billy was not illiterate. As a youngster, he was an avid reader of books and dime novels. Not only could he read and write, but he also had an artistic and legible handwriting. Judging from the letters he wrote to Governor Wallace, they were articulate and almost error-free. As well as being able to read and write, Billy had a beautiful singing voice, and he could play the fiddle. He was renowned for his charm, and those he met spoke of his likeable character. The movie portrays John Tunstall as middle-aged, who has political interest to enhance his prestige. This is somewhat true, as the real Tunstall hoped to unseat the Irish and make a fortune as the county's new boss, though in real life he was only 24 years old when murdered. In the movie, one of Murphy's hired hands, McCloskey, joins up with Tunstall while Doc attempts to court Murphy's ward, Yen's son. Murphy's men kill Tunstall, leading his lawyer friend Alexander McSween to arrange for the Regulators to be deputised and given warrants for the killer's arrest. In the aftermath, a hot-headed Billy challenges Dick's authority as the group's foreman, as the Regulators attempt to take Murphy's henchmen in alive. Instead, Billy guns down several unarmed men, including McCloskey, whom he suspects of still working for Murphy. Newspapers paint the Regulators as a deadly gang headed by a larger-than-life outlaw, Billy the Kid. In truth, it was on the 9th of March 1878, the third day of the journey back to Lincoln, that the Regulators killed McCloskey, Morton and Baker in the Captain foothills along the Blackwater Creek. They claim that Morton murdered McCloskey and tried to escape with Baker, forcing them to kill the two prisoners. Few believe this story, as they thought it unlikely that Morton would have killed his only friend in the group, as the bodies of Morton and Baker each bore 11 bullet holes, one for each Regulator, and it is believed that the Regulators murdered them and killed McCloskey for opposing them. With the county in disarray, Sheriff William Brady asked for assistance from Territorial Attorney General Thomas Benton Catron. Catron referred the topic to the Territorial Governor Samuel B. Axtell. The Governor decreed that John Wilson, the Justice of the Peace, had been appointed illegally by the Lincoln County Commissioners. Wilson had deputised the Regulators and issued the warrants for Tunstall's murderers. Axtell's decree meant that the Regulators' actions formerly considered legal, were now illegal. Axtell also was able to revoke Weideman's status as the Deputy US Marshal, making Sheriff Brady and his men the only law officers in Lincoln County. On the 1st of April 1878, the Regulators French, McNabb, Middleton, Waite, Brown and Billy the Kid made ready in the corral behind Tunstall's store, before attacking Brady and his deputies on the main streets of Lincoln. Brady died of at least a dozen gunshot wounds. Deputy George W. Heineman was also wounded fatally. Billy and French broke cover and dashed to Brady's body, possibly to get his arrest warrant for McSween, or to recover McCarthy's rifle, which Brady had kept from a prior arrest. A surviving deputy, Billy Matthews, wounded both men with one bullet that passed through both of them. French's wound was so severe that he had to be temporarily harboured by Sam Corbett in the crawl space in Corbett's house. Weideman was also in the corral, but whether he participated was never ascertained. He claimed he was feeding Tunstall's dog. Another one of the men on their warrants was Buckshot Roberts, who in the movie tracks them down and a shootout ensues. Roberts barricades himself in an outhouse and kills Dick, and as a reaction, the rest of the Regulators shoot up the outhouse. This led the others to go on the run. While an injured Doc goes his own way, Billy then takes leadership of the group. The real event to this shootout happened 3 days after the murders of Brady and Heineman. The Regulators headed southwest from the area around Lincoln, reaching Blazer's Mill. They came upon the rancher Buckshot Roberts, listed on their arrest warrant as one of Tunstall's murderers. In the ensuing shootout, the Regulators mortally wounded Roberts, but he killed Brewer and wounded Middleton, Skurlock, Coe and Billy. The movie moves on to when the gang meet with a furious Alex McSween, who explains that their badges have been revoked. Though they are now wanted men, Billy insists that their actions will bring attention to Murphy's corruption. While Charlie revisits a brothel, Billy kills an arrogant bounty hunter, and the gang escapes to Mexico, where Charlie marries a local woman. It is then that soon-to-be Sheriff Pat Garrett warns Billy that Murphy's men will make an attempt on Alex's life the following day. In truth, after Dick's death, the Regulators elected Frank McNabb as their captain, not Billy. On the 29th of April 1878, Sheriff Pepin was directing a posse that included Jesse Evans' gang and the Seven Rivers Warriors. They engaged in a shootout with the Regulators at Fritz Ranch. McNabb died in the gunfire, Saunders was badly wounded, and Frank Coe was captured. The next day, the Seven Rivers members Tom Green, Charles Marshall, Jim Patterson and John Gelvin were killed in Lincoln, and although the Regulators were blamed, this was never proven. Frank Coe escaped custody sometime after his capture, allegedly with the assistance of Deputy Sheriff Wallace Ollinger, who gave him a pistol. The day after McNabb's death, the Regulators assumed defensive positions in the town of Lincoln, trading shots with Dolan men and allegedly members of the US Army Cavalry. By allegedly shooting at government troops, the Regulators gained a new set of enemies. On the 15th of May, the Regulators tracked down and captured Jesse Evans' gang member, Manuel Segovia, who is believed to have shot McNabb. They shot him during an alleged escape. Around the time of Segovia's death, the Regulators gained a new member, a young Texan cowboy named Tom O'Folliard, who soon became Billy's best friend. In the movie, the gangs are at Alex's house in Lincoln. The gang is surrounded by Murphy's men and famed outlaw John Kinney. Realising that they were lured into a trap, the Regulators survive an entire day's shootout. US Army troops arrive, as does Murphy himself with Yen, who runs inside and is reunited with Doc. Murphy orders the soldiers to set fire to the house, while Alex's wife leaves unharmed and Chaz slips away. Trapped in the burning attic, the gang throws Alex's possessions out of the window, including a trunk with Billy inside, allowing him to surprise their attackers. In the chaos, Chavez returns with their rescued horses, and Charlie and Kinney shoot each other dead. Doc and Yen ride away, and Steve gets a wounded Chavez onto a remaining horse to ride away at the cost of being gunned down himself. Alex is gunned down by a Gatling gun, and Billy escapes after shooting Murphy between the eyes. The truth behind the movie's portrayal is that on the afternoon of the 15th of July 1878, when the Regulators were surrounded in Lincoln in two different positions, the McSween house and the Ellis store. McSween, although a non-participant, was the former partner of John Tunstall, and along with John Chisholm, who is totally missing from the movie, had organised and financially supported the Regulators. On the 15th of July 1878, McSween returned to Lincoln with about 41 additional supporters, 10 of whom he put up in his house, while the rest found beds throughout the town. Shortly afterwards, a large force hired by the Murphy Dolan faction and led by Pepin arrived in Lincoln and surrounded the Regulators at McSween's house. The posse and the Regulators traded gunfire for much of that day. At least 5 Murphy Dolan men were wounded in the initial exchange, while the Regulators suffered no casualties. During the next 3 days little changed, with no further casualties reported. Finally, on the 18th of July, a cavalry detachment under the command of Lieutenant Colonel Nathan Dudley from Fort Stanton arrived. They had either been summoned by frightened residents or by a report that a soldier had been wounded in Lincoln. The soldiers quickly ended the skirmish. By the end of the 3rd day, the McSween supporters scattered around the town had departed, leaving just the contingent at the McSween homestead. At some point during the night of the 18th to 19th of July, however, the McSween house was set on fire. When McSween and the others attempted to flee the following morning, he and several other Regulators were shot and killed. Now under the leadership of Billy and Jim French, the Regulators quickly reassessed their position and forced an escape from the burning house. Reported casualty figures for the battle varied, but the Regulators lost at least 5 men, including McSween, while Pepin's posse suffered 2 dead. The movie ends with an epilogue from Doc, who reveals that Chavez took work at a farm in California. Doc moved east and married Yen's son. Alex's widow became one of the most prominent cattlewomen of all time, and Murphy's ring of corruption collapsed. Billy continued to ride until he was killed by Garrett and buried next to Charlie at Fort Summer, where someone later carved the epitaph, Pebbles. In reality, the Lincoln County War accomplished little. The surviving Regulators, most notably Billy the Kid, continued as fugitives. Gradually, his fellow gunmen scattered to their various fates. Billy rode with Beaudry, O'Folliard and a few other friends, with whom he rustled cattle and committed other crimes. Eventually, Sheriff Pat Garrett and his posse tracked and killed O'Folliard, Beaudry, and in July 1881, Billy the Kid. The 3 men were buried at Fort Summer, New Mexico. Unlike in the movie, Lawrence Murphy died of cancer on the 20th of October 1878 at the age of about 47. Alex McSween's wife, Susan, hired attorney Hudson Chapman to pursue charges against Dolman and the others, in addition to working for an amnesty for the Regulators. She then took over a large sum of land in the years after the Lincoln County War, establishing a ranch in Three Rivers, New Mexico. By the mid-1890s, her ranch holdings were some of the largest in the territory. The movie Young Guns is a must-watch. It portrays the historical events around the Lincoln County War better than earlier movies, with relationships between characters being remarkably close, something that is unique when it comes to Hollywood movies.